teach you how to stand in straight lines. You go to Australia, they can't stand in what they call a queue. They all crowded around. We learned that in this country. We learn how to raise our hand before we go to the bathroom. We know how to, you have to do that when you get to prison. So it's good training. And so we have to ask, are the schools not working or are they working? And I think this is the beginning of unpacking that.
So I get the pleasure of following the president and the pastor.
Oh, we good. We good.
But I too want to thank Congressman Vesey for this opportunity to give us this venue in this space to talk about this work that's very important to all of us. And also thank our moderator and the panelists. Of course, Dr. Brown said a lot of what I wanted to say, and that is that we need to stop believing that the school system was designed to really serve and educate our children.
It was.
And so I think by beginning at that point and understanding and getting rid of that assumption or notion that the schools are somehow broken is really the starting place for the work that needs to go forward. And also understanding that the education of black children is a political act. And so as educators, oftentimes, I think we're uncomfortable, maybe not those in this room, but with the notion of politics, right? It can be an ugly word. I just want to educate children and teach them how to read and write and compute, not necessarily engage in politics. But we must understand that the education of black children is a political act. And that the existing systems, the schools, and the structures that we currently operate under, whether the traditional public school system, whether charter schools, whether alternative schools that are supposed to provide students a second chance, but really, again, are a pathway to prison, whether it's even independent private schools where many of our students experience a lot of racial violence, right? Yeah. And hostility, and being in a hostile environment, the type of environment that Du Bois wrote about, yes. Right? And so there's always been this constant struggle in terms of trying to improve the system so that it will better educate our children, but also resisting that system. And I think that we should get to the point, and I believe we have enough evidence now to understand that the current system and the current configuration was never designed to prepare our children in any meaningful way. And so I think that's the first part. The other piece that's important is recognizing a lot of the trauma that has been experienced historically by our communities, okay? And so historical trauma theory is another area of research that I think is important for us to remember, that we need to look back and kind of see some of the damage that has been done, whether it's physical displacement and dislocation of black children in communities, and we see that in gentrifying spaces today. Whether it's economic exploitation, where the things that we produce and create are now used, right, in ways that exploit us and don't benefit us. Whether it's the symbolic, the emotional, and physical violence that our communities have experienced and what children continue to experience today in schools. We have a lot of children who are experiencing trauma at the hands of their classroom teachers, right, or the leadership of the school, who doesn't necessarily value who they are and what they bring to the table. And so again, it's important for us to be aware of that. And then cultural dispossession. There's a lot of work and discussion right now around culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive pedagogy, but I don't know that we're grounding it in the history and the knowledges that are really important. And so we can take those terms and say that we're engaging in culturally relevant practices and leadership, but what does that mean? And what does that look like in what we're referring to as the new Jim Crow, where race may not explicitly be the thing that we're using to segregate students, but in fact, it's these structures that were designed to keep and maintain a racial caste system. That's right. That's right. And so again, the notion that schools serve as the great equalizer, that education is the civil rights issue of our time, it feels good and it sounds good, but again, we have to, particularly as black people, unpack that and really think about what that means and what it is that we want our children to be able to learn, to know, to produce, and to contribute in important ways. And so I'll stop there.
In the Jim Crow era, we know that school leaders, that's teachers and administrators, and in some cases the community, were faced with lots of challenges that some of us who have worked in schools can't imagine that we would be able to overcome. But we have different sets of challenges today, and some of those challenges do mirror the old Jim Crow and the new Jim Crow. For instance, in the old Jim Crow, the black principal was often the person that the white school boards and white superintendents went to say, how are we going to do this, or how are we going to do that? So there wasn't really a space for them to make policy, but they were the activist, the advocate, the spokesperson for the black community. So our second question is, what are some of the challenges facing black educators, teachers, and leaders as they work to educate black children, black youth, and black young adults? What are some of the challenges that we're facing today?
Same order. Same order. Yeah, you know, you're throwing these bombs out there, Linda, and so hopefully at some point we can break these things down a bit. I mean, I think our colleagues have already talked about a few things. I'll add a few more. Some of the challenges. I mean, I'll go back to these larger issues, stereotypes, and attitudes that support racial discrimination in our public spaces, but speak to them now within schools. And we heard some of them around schools, around turnaround schools, for example, busing, discipline policies and practices, desegregation issues, language and linguistic issues, closing schools, right? So the notion of closing schools reform right now is a real issue for us. They don't happen only because of isolated events like recently happened around weather-related issues, but they happen also regarding inequality issues that are systemic to communities. And so those could potentially be two different ways of thinking about closings of schools. In the latter, there's a phenomenon that we know, and it's been identified in Richard Rothstein's latest book, The Color of Law, that these de facto and de jure segregation, racially explicit policies were going on in local, federal, county agencies. This is not new. The story of Pittsburgh, where I spent 15 years between late 90s and recently, is an example. But you don't have to just think about Pittsburgh. I mean, there are multiple cities. Pittsburgh has a particular reality and identity by virtue of where it's located in its steel industry and so forth. But you look at that great migration of African Americans that left to go north. They left to go north, but also were handicapped by virtue of certain policies that were in place. That's The Color of Law. That's Rothstein's book. That book is not just there. That's in the neighborhood where we are taking place right now. This is Shore. You're in Shore. Welcome to D.C. In this place around D.C., captivated in a book by Derek Hara, speaks about the Cappuccino City, a changing nature of migration patterns out of the city of D.C. and in the inflight of white class-based gentrification in the city. And so there's some realities. It's right here where you're sitting in that place. Right? It's not devoid, it's not far away. It's right here where we're sitting, right here in the corner of Mount Vernon and 7th or Mount Vernon and 9th. And so the reality of these issues happen. The question is, when we go outside, where do we see schools? How far are schools away? Right? And so part of these closing school realities that sometimes are faced are the rupture of communities. I use the example again of Hazelwood within Pittsburgh, and that's the signal that when schools closed, primarily doing that right-sizing phenomenon that the superintendent called them then. And that's interesting to note. One is kind of, as black educators, recognizing the political language and the discourse around change. Now, I mean, right-sizing sounds like you're trying to fit something on. You know, it doesn't fit so good, you're trying to put it on. Make sure this 38 or this 42 fits properly. But right-sizing was about closing schools. It's about closing schools for purposes that look like for low enrollment or low performance. But that's not the whole story. That's not the whole story. And so when kids from kindergarten to 12th grade are bused from communities to other neighboring communities, that's a phenomenon that we black teachers and communities have to face, because those are disproportionately happening to our communities. And so how do we come active in that? How do we organize around those issues? And so maybe we could talk about those things as well, but some of the challenges we face are the things that we've spoken, but are using the closing school phenomenon as a real one that faces our communities right now, from the large ones to the small ones.
Okay, so to quote Du Bois, in 1935, he asked us, does the Negro need separate schools? And he said, in short, they are needed for the proper education of the Negro race. Said Negro, my bad. Because he said that any people for proper education for that to occur, they need the sympathetic touch between a student and the teacher. And in my work, I found that, and Dr. Horsford, you spoke about this historical trauma, and I found that working with school leaders and teachers of color, I found that many of them, unfortunately, are doing the work of the system in many ways that Dr. Brown spoke about. I found that, this is in short, black people need to believe in black people. I think that black school leaders and teachers need to believe in children of color. And I'm not saying this is a blanket statement, just in my work and my community, I found that many of us have little to no regard for our very children. And they do that with the enforcement of policies that are gender normed, and how they speak to our young people, and then they think that this tough love, this kind of beating down because the world is rough. And I'm like, okay, well, this should be their salvation. We should prepare them and not train them to accept it or to be humble or to shut down when you walk in the room because of fear and not of love. I think that black teachers and school leaders really need to kind of look at what was done to them as lessons of what not to do, of these bad practices that should not become our best practices. And I think about, I guess, in South Carolina a few years ago when the schoolgirl who wouldn't surrender her cell phone. Do you know a black teacher called the school leader in on her? So oftentimes they looked at the safety agent as being the problem. And I agree, very problematic. But I'm wondering, well, who called them in the first place? And why couldn't he speak to her in such a way that, she knew that maybe this wasn't the proper time for the cell phone, or even knowing her background and maybe why that was important to her at this very moment. So I think we have to do our homework in a real way and not just look back at, yesterday, but look at yesterdays. Look at our institutions and what they systemically kind of recreate with every generation. If we are to break this cycle, then we have to start with ourselves. So yes, while the system is at fault, are we complicit in that, though? And if we're not, then what are we doing to change these paradigms for the next generation of school leaders and teachers? How was that, Dr.
Good, that was good.
You inspired me.
I was just thinking, I love my colleagues because everyone's playing off each other. I wish this could have actually been even a conversation over a panel. We can, that'll be good. Yeah, let's, because he's quoting Rothstein and Du Bois, but we're all in each other's heads. To answer her question about the challenges, I want to pick back up with Sonia left and weave back through very quickly. One, there is a racial caste system in this country, and I think that needs to be clear. I know you took Sociology 101, and they said caste systems were in England. We have a class system, and they told you what the differences were, but that's not true. There is a caste system. The difference is the truth is that most societies have a caste system. The question is whether or not you are explicit about it or implicit about it. So in a place like Germany, they are very explicit that they only want to educate 3 to 7% of their population at the highest level because that's all they need for the advanced working class, manager class, everyone else can fall where they were. So they take A-level exams. It's very structured. You are not going to college. Don't try it. It's really clear. The notion of a German dream does not exist. The American dream does not exist. But dreams are not reality. So that said, in America, we actually do not have an explicit plan, but we do have an implicit reality where we do segregate and stratify our entire structure based on schooling outcomes, and economics. We're just less intentional about it. The challenge is because of wealth disbursement and housing pattern changes, it's really hard to tackle the school problem. And what you must realize is that in some communities, they still really have community schools. They still have neighborhood schools, whether it's Jewish day schools, country day schools, or just public schools. When I went to school, I had the unique reality of being able to be educated by the last generation of segregation teachers right before they retired. So I had the same teachers that my uncles and aunts had. But that said, there were two principals. My grandmother, third grade education, and a domestic worker. She was a housekeeper for a Jewish family, third grade education. But on our block, we had two principals, one lawyer, and so it was not uncommon for me to see my principal, Mr. Wheeler Hughes, across the street at Mr. Pearson's house because that was the community. My guidance counselor in middle school, who later transferred to the high school, Dolly Brown, was also my Sunday school teacher on Sunday and my vacation Bible school teacher in the summer. So the notion of school.
He wasn't getting away with nothing.
No. And she went to school with my mama, and they sang in the choir together. So the notion of school as a part of family and as a part of community existed. It still exists in other communities, like where I lived when I was in D.C. in Falls Church, but it may not exist for the children in Southeast whose teachers come in from other zip codes. That said, we also don't teach at home like we used to.
Come on now.
Things like code switching.
Come on now.
I know y'all talk about the Queen's English and good grammar and all that, but that was only what I think, what's her name? Gloria Lansing Billings calls it standard edited English. No one speaks standard edited English. You write that because we teach you that in school. Train to think, right? We train you how to write it. But when you home, you use double, when you home, no verb, when you home, no verb, right? You have double negatives, ain't no way I'm gonna watch that tonight.
We got rules to that.
Right.
We got rules to that.
Right.
You can't perpetrate. We got rules to that. Like
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
But when you write, but it's not just you. Y'all don't remember. See, I'm older than all y'all. You remember there used to be a show. Come on, I know my time left. I'm watching. That's the last point. Used to be a show called Valley Girls. Do y'all remember that show called Valley Girls? The California Girls. Oh my God. So they weren't speaking the King's English either, right? But they learn in school standard editing English, and we used to teach our children how to code switch, because that is what they do in ETS. They have a fancy name for it. They call it differential item functioning, or the diff analysis. So they test, each test question on the SAT, they know how well poor children will perform on the question. They know how well middle class, upper class, structured by race. It's called differential item functioning. How well will each group perform on this item? And based on that, they determine which items to put on the standardized test. But now we say we're going to do it all in one wholesome reform. But there are really social structures, as Sonia has said, that are working. So you can put all of the curriculum plans in, all of the new construction, all your charter schools, all your alternative route to licensure. But if you do not have some real family engagement, some real community engagement, and some acknowledgement. I don't know about you, but when I was in school, it was expected for us to learn Shakespeare and Chaucer and Emily Barrett Browning. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. We learned all that. But at home, you learned Langston Hughes. In Sunday school, you had to learn James Weldon Johnson and God Stepped Out on Space and looked around and said, as far as, you had to learn it at home. You cannot expect the structure to do everything because it was never designed to do it. That's all I'm saying. Go ahead, Sonia.
What was the question again?
Challenges.
Okay. No, so some of the challenges facing Black educators. I think for me the big challenge is I want to talk about the reform movement, the corporate reform movement, which I think has really been, for me, a frustrating.
Teach for America.
Stop. A frustrating kind of debate that's been taking place as it relates to Black education. I feel like we have really put ourselves into these camps around whether or not we believe that traditional public and community schools are better or whether school choice is a better option. You know, it really depends, again, on the particular context that you're in. But again, I think we need to be unified in understanding what we know works for our children. And that starts with leadership that believes and is committed to actually educating our children. And so when I think about, you know, we teach in leadership preparation programs for students who want to become principals and superintendents. And there is a huge population of students that have come through Teach for America and that have only worked and attended charter schools, right? I mean, they're very young, and so they attended charter schools, they've worked in charter schools, they've always been a part of charter networks. They have learned to teach under No Child Left Behind. Okay, so they're used to standardization and accountability and relying on these tests, which we know, again, are biased. Lonnie Guinier said that the LSAT is a better indicator of what type of car your parent drives than whether or not you'll be successful in law school. And so I think as educators, we need to recognize that. Okay, so it's important, again, to deliver that content and know what our children need to be able to live the type of life that they want to live, right? But at the same time, we cannot really rely on these tools that we know were designed to prove to everyone else that we cannot achieve at the same level as anyone else. And so the achievement gap narrative, testing and standardization, those have been tools to concretize this narrative that Black and brown children will always be on the bottom. And now we've generated all this voluminous data that just justifies and affirms that Black children can't learn at the same level, that we're underachieving, that we're persistently underperforming, which is a rationale for closing the schools, which is a rationale for bringing in charter management organizations, which serves as a rationale for alternative routes to licensure like Teach for America, where someone is educated for 5 weeks and put in front of my child to teach them how to read and write, and they're not from the community, they don't understand the culture. But they get the funding and the resources and the support and the policy changes, right, to support that. Depleting the resources that we need to educate students in traditional public schools. And so we have to stop. And I think part of it is, again, that education. We had, Dr. Watson and I had a wonderful opportunity with Philip Smith to teach students at Teachers College in our Summer Principals Academy, which has a lot of students from Teach for America. And a lot of them, you know, their graduate education is partially funded. Right? So now here's another layer. We're privileging those who chose to only go to school for 5 weeks to learn how to teach a student than the person who has committed their life to the field of education. Come on, I got my amen corner right here, okay? But this is the challenge, and I think particularly for our younger millennials that are coming up who are committed to our children, who want to help change the world, who want to be the ones to really ensure that our students are exemplifying Black excellence, but they don't know the history. They don't understand, they haven't read Du Bois in their preparation program in 6 weeks. They don't know anything about the community that they're working in. So our responsibility as researchers and educators is to generate that research, the evidence, the knowledge that we're going to provide when we're preparing leaders, to be able to change the discourse, to ask the right questions. It's not about whether or not our children can learn. We know that. And so we have to, again, recognize it's a political act. And so what does that mean? How do we change the ways in which we work to support the education of Black children? And so I think it's, again, just that acknowledgement. And you know, it's hard. It's always this paradox where we're trying to operate within these institutions and structures. We all do it every day in the trenches, you know. But how do we work as a collective?
That's the question.
How do we bring it together so we're not crying and struggling and frustrated in our own space, fighting our own battles, right, as Black people in these institutions, but how do we build a collective where we can really leverage the support, the knowledge, the perspectives, and the strength that we have when we're able to work together?
I think the thing that stuck out to me, and go ahead and clap. Thank you. Is, you know, my family's from Round Oak, Georgia. It's about a little bit bigger than this room. And down there we code switch. I go back there, we founded a church there in 1883, is still standing in the original position. But what was also expected of me, expected of Chris, we both come from that Southern background, is that you will represent us well. you will know when to coast. And I think that's what we still need to be teaching our children, is that your foundation is here in this house, here in this church, here in this community, and we want you to go out and represent us well. We don't want you to forget your foundation, but we want you to be able to go out and represent us well, which I think is, I always remember that my grandmother too had a third grade education. Could she have imagined that what she taught me would have gotten me this far? So I think we need to still be hammering those messages in to our children. Our next question is, what are some of the characteristics of effective black school leaders? We've already talked about this. You lived in a neighborhood where the principal lived across the street, went to the same church, stopped in the same grocery store, knew your mother, your father, your so-and-so. You know you better not be messing up while they're around, because you had a collective community of elders, of mothers and fathers. So what are the characteristics that black leaders need today to address some of these challenges we've been talking about?
I punted on this question, but I can take a stab. This is not so much my area, but I think I'm back to making sure that we contextualize these questions. Black school leaders, right? And so let's just say I'm at a university, and so we're more than just K-12, right? I'm back to my colleague as well, who says that we should be working and engaging our families and communities, right? Our communities, our universities should be connected more, should be engaged more, should be developing partnerships. I mean, I know we're getting to some issues around agenda and some solutions, but also I think about the narrow pipeline or the shortages, for example, in our universities and in our classrooms around black and brown, but black women and men teachers, leaders, principals, you know, at multiple levels, not to mention the university. And so when you hear me speaking, you'll hear me speaking about the need for the courageousness that you all have already spoken about, leaders. And there's some leaders on this table and in this room. And so there might be some things that we want to talk about around characteristics of leaders. And I'm reading a book by Randall Robinson right now. He wasn't a black school leader, but he was a leader. I mean, his notions around quitting America, for me, I think speak to a larger mindset about how we lead, how we ought to lead not just in schools, but in our local communities, you know, issues around foreign policy and politics, of which that was his area. But how do we think about that? How do we think about extending our notion of school leaders per se? But then also back to Chris's point, which I love, which is, and I'm from the same space, not reared in the South, but having the same kind of representations and expectations of a mom who is a black school person and leader, but a family of school teachers. And so the expectation at home and in the community spoke to a way you would represent outside. And this was not just because this was a teacher, but this was the person who also served multiple roles in the community. And so we're not necessarily in that same space now, but how do we think through, how do we encourage our young people to recognize the leaders that, right, to tap the leaders that exist in their space. They are at schools, they're coaches, right, even more so. They're on their ball fields. I mean, so this notion of school leaders is not just within the context of our schools. And so we talk about those characteristics as well.
Okay. So in my work, when looking at effective black school leaders, what I found that the most effective leaders with both an E and an A are simply those leaders who are invested in the children charged to their care. Like they believe in them, they love them, like, and I know I keep going back to this ethos of love because I really believe that, and I'm not the biggest fan of Cornel West of late, but you know, he has this one line, he said, you know, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. Right.
Can't serve if you can't serve.
And that's so important, and we have to realize that that's a privilege that we have, this charge to care for other people's children, to act in loco parentis, in place of the parent. So my answer is short. It's the 4 C's, you know, care, creativity, courage, and just common sense. I really think we know what works. We know what worked for us. I said, I'm from Harlem and I'm here, so Harlem works for me. But I know it was the people in my community who believed in me and loved me through it when I was starting to go left, or when I doubted myself, or when I had moments of uncertainty. So I just think that it's simple. It's just that simple. And I think we have these complex theories and folks write about us and study us, but we know what we need. We know what works for us, and we have to own that and have faith in that. No, it got us here. We're here, and we're here together, and we have to realize that and celebrate that and encourage the next generation. So, whenever you're in doubt, trust your heart, So that's about it. I think I'm done. You like the 4 C's? Oh, you got it too? All right.
No, I wrote that down.
Okay, well, thank you. Dr. Watts.
This is what the collective is going to do. I'll share.
Everyone's speaking from their research perspective. Let me just give 2 quick answers, like she did. One, in several books I talk about what's called the tripartite modes of mentoring.
Several books.
Yes, several books. I say it all the time. I keep saying it over and over. Hopefully somebody hear it. And there's something, if you even think back to your own career. So I think that 2 things matter. One is the tripartite modes of mentoring. And that is that if you look back where you are, there's someone, or maybe more than one, who demonstrated these 3 things at the same time. One, they were an academic midwife. They helped give birth to a knowledge, a sense of self, a potential of seeing yourself beyond where you were and some possibility. So this person birthed in you academically or professionally some sense of possibility. 2, they were a friend-tor. They were not a mentor only, but there was a social dynamic to this relationship. Not only did they bring you alive intellectually, academically, professionally, but they bordered the line where you're not sure if it's professional or personal, if it's social or collegial. You can't figure it out. And that's what's called a asymmetrical relationship. So this is someone who has a dominant position, but who is now acting in a subdominant way. And the third thing that person does is they are a role molder. Now, this is very different than role modeling. So this is not someone who's trying to make you into their image or show you how to become what they became, but they are laying their hands, their knowledge, and their spirit on you to help shape you into what you desire to be. And if you look back on your career, your trajectory, there is someone who demonstrated all 3 of those things simultaneously, and you know who they are. And that is the reason you are where you are today. So the first answer is the tripartite modes of mentoring. And then the second thing that leads to effective education is money. You need money. You've got to have, I'm a president, I want that money. Yes, indeed, I'm going to the legislature tomorrow. You want your money. And let me tell you why. There's a case, and I pulled it up because I couldn't remember the second part. I always call it the Abbott Decision. But if anybody's here from New Jersey, you know the Abbott versus Burke, which was wonderful litigation. Some people think of it as a school deseg litigation, but it really was a funding inequity litigation. So what they discovered was that there were 28 counties across New Jersey where the students were performing extremely poorly, but they also found that those were places that also had extremely low property tax revenue or millage. And so what the state said was that in order to make the schools better, we're going to fund those 28 counties. The state would supplement it at the same level as the highest counties. Well, they poured that money into Abbott, and something unbelievable happened. All of a sudden, the so-called, quote, poor children in those 28 counties, they didn't start just performing at the level of the highest counties. They started overperforming and exceeding the performance of the highest counties. Then we had a problem. So the same liberals, I'm sorry, I know y'all liberal, but anyway, the same liberals who wanted Abbott, they really didn't mean for your children to be equal to their children. They just want y'all to have some pencils and paper. But when they discovered, no, read Abbott versus Burke. When they discovered that the children in the lower 28 were now outperforming the children in the lead financial districts, they led the same liberals, oh, it sounds like Palm Sunday, same people who said, Hosanna cried, crucify him a week later. But they said, we don't want Abbott. It's costing us too much money. That wasn't the problem. It wasn't the cost. It was the differentiation in outcomes, and the system was no longer doing what it was designed to do. So that's what happened. 2 points. Molds
I
and
was
money.
supposed to sit
Molds
here,
and money.
and he was
You was
supposed
late.
to sit here.
You was late. You was late.
So, I've been really feeling some kind of way under the Trump administration. So anybody who knows me knows that this has really, this has really impacted me in interesting ways, but I think a positive dimension of it is just the sense of urgency.
Yes.
And so I think we need revolutionary leadership in terms of even how we're beginning to think about these issues. And I think that revolutionary leadership is just acknowledging what the panel has said in terms of just understanding the fight that we're up against, and understanding that it's not even just the right, if we're talking about politics, but the left and liberal ideologies that never included us in these ideas of equality, justice, and liberty. And so how do we, again, engage in this revolutionary leadership? Of course, as a researcher, I think that research is very important, and that we need Black theories to conduct Black research to better understand how we develop policy solutions for Black people. And you can't apply a theory or ideology that doesn't even acknowledge us, let alone expect us to have the same or believe that we're equal, to end up providing that policy solution. And so one of the things that the Research Collective is committed to is really engaging in research that reflects that Black perspective, that helps to understand that you can't have Blackness without whiteness, and you don't have whiteness without Blackness. And the nature of that relationship makes it so complicated to the point where if I say Black Lives Matter, someone has to say all lives matter. Or if I say Black Lives Matter, now blue lives matter. How is that dichotomy? And why is that dichotomy and dialectic set up that way? And as long as that continues to happen, we're not going to have integrated schools. We're not going to have a real commitment to diversity, because Black equality is now confronted up against white freedom. Okay? And so when we talk about segregation, desegregation, for example, right? And now we're talking about resegregation. We focus on what happens to children of color. We don't focus on the decisions that white parents are making and white policy makers are making on a daily basis that puts us in this situation of resegregation. And so one of the things that the collective wants to do now is just shift the way that we talk about even Black-white relations, the Black-white binary, centering whiteness as the standard. Even when we talk about a Black-white achievement gap, Asian students are performing white students, so why not have a look at compare to Asian students if we really want to raise the bar? Why is whiteness the norm, right? And so I'm interested in beginning to do some research where we talk about not white and non-white, but Black and non-Black. And so if I'm framing questions that way, what does that mean, and how are we thinking about the coalitions that maybe could be built, right? In terms of individuals across the diaspora. We have a new majority in this country, which is why we're experiencing a lot of the backlash that we're currently experiencing. People are acting like white supremacy is the new thing under Trump, but it's always been, and we've had school districts that have been trying to secede from their counties and districts for many, many years, and countries, and people have written about this. And so how do we at least bring this research to the fore? How do we bring it together so that our students as well don't have to start digging into the stacks, but have this really rich information and knowledge to pull from, and to take us to the next set of questions, and to really advance solutions so that we're not having the same conversation over and over again. And so I think revolutionary leaders equip themselves with that knowledge and that research and building those coalitions. And I want to give a shout out to Philip Smith, who serves as my research assistant. He's a doctoral candidate at Teachers College, and he does this beautiful workshop around Anansi. And at one point he'll be able to share that with you. But really, it's how many of you are familiar with the story of Anansi? Despite a lot of educators, right? But it really represents wisdom and creativity. And so he does a great presentation about Anansi as a kind of theoretical way of thinking about leadership. Wow. Right? And kind of this notion of the trickster, which Vanessa Siddle Walker writes about as well. But if you're a leader in these, again, and you're working in these institutions that are part of the system, you have to be creative. And you have to be wise, right? And even trying to outwit your competition. And this requires you to remember who you're working for, right? Who are you working for? Is it the institution? Or is it the children and the teachers, right? And the leaders in the building that need your support, need your knowledge, and need us to really, again, focus on a unified agenda for Black education. And so I think that's, again, what the collective wants to do. How do we bring together all of the great work that people are doing all across the country and use those numbers and use that knowledge and those perspectives to really engage in meaningful solutions and an agenda to move forward?
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Can we just talk?
Yeah, can we?
Can we just talk?
Yeah, can we just talk?
This is so Eurocentric.
Wait,
This
don't shoot the
last
messenger.
question
Don't
is
shoot the
going to
messenger
get
right
you
there.
to
My
talk.
colleague right there.
No comments from me.
Yeah.
What's our agenda
Yeah.
for Black education in the era of Trump?
Yeah, and I mean, it is an opportunity. Yeah, yeah. I feel you, Linda. I feel you, Linda. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to continue to have conversations here, right? Everybody's quoting somebody up here. Let me quote Kwame Ture on this
So
one.
radical.
Organize, organize, organize. Right? That's the answer. And so I think part of our organization and how we organize collaboratively will have to extend us. I mean, let me go to a favorite quote of mine from a mentor of mine that happened sometime in November of last year when she put it out there, and I thought this helped me, at least this helped me immediately after a tsunami. It was a quote by H.L. Mencken. As democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be occupied by a downright fool and a complete narcissistic moron, period. That's 1920. So
H.L. Mencken.
So one of the things that so that helped me. and it reminded me, right, the things that we're saying about ensuring that these things will pass, and we got work to do. And so, I mean, philanthropy has played a major role in Black education for years. I mean, those Rosenwald schools that operated pre-Brown helped to establish opportunities for intellectual and creative development and create spaces for us. We need to ensure that we're speaking to our colleagues in the philanthropic spaces, ensuring that they're willing to be creative with some solutions. The Kellogg Foundation, for example, just released a $1 million grant to Decision Information Resources out of Dallas for understanding racial reconciliation and pain issues, right? So I'm missing some of it, but that's the nature of the work that they're undertaking. Like what's happening that philanthropic communities are asking, they can be places and venues and that we can help answer some questions around Black education. Our universities have to get beyond their quote unquote towers of elitism in some ways to ensure that we're reaching communities and schools properly in partnerships and engagements. Because we don't do any good by teaching only in those walls as well, by not ensuring that that work is not appropriately, there's not mutual communication and partnership between those. We've got to do a better job in this era, and this should remind us in this particular moment that we've got to reach our colleagues in Belize and in Jamaica and in the islands and on the continent and in other places where we exist to ensure that black education is happening in the diaspora, and we're clear on those matters. And so it pains me to think that our people don't know that the same systems are at place in that triangle that existed between South America, the United States, Africa, and England, that we don't know that those things still exist, that we don't think that those things are still relevant, right? I think we have to ask the critical questions in the context of Pittsburgh and Jaziri X, who's a local rapper there, but he's hit national stage. He asked, how can we get a job in biotechnology if we're only thinking about survival psychology? How do we think differently about the work that we're doing? How do we span these places? Right, and I think he's speaking specifically, and he was in that lyric, about the changing nature of development in places where communities and universities in to take over. And so those become less, those spaces are not filled by us in classrooms. And so part of this agenda it is an agenda of organization. It is an agenda of ensuring that we understand our struggle and emancipatory agenda is not unique to our hood, and that it extends beyond states and communities and nation states, and that we can talk that same agenda with other people around the world. It's embarrassing that the person that occupied 1600 can't pronounce a country on a continent in Southern Africa, right? You can't do that. I mean, this is not coming to America, and so part of that is just making sure that we are real as well. Let us not say Nambia out there. Let's make sure we're clear about how to pronounce it in this room, right? So, and we have to be willing to extend ourselves beyond our places and bring it back home. I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you. So it's final question, and again, what is the agenda for black education in the Trump era and beyond? And I really like Dr. Horsford's prior response when he spoke about this revolutionary leadership. But I think it must be coupled with love and liberatory practices. I think that we have nothing to lose but our chains. And I think that fearlessness, that courageousness and creativity and that critical care that's embodied in the action of love, I think that's what we need in schools today. So I'm going to end there and turn it over to my good colleague, President Benediction. I want to hear what he has to say.
I
am going to play. I'm a president. Fundraising is everything. One, I want to answer quickly. I think the answer is in what Dr. Horsford has done in beginning this conversation in the meetings we've had prior to today in this research collective on black education and leadership out of Teachers College. And my hope is ambition, and ambition is, oh, that's my wife texting me. I got to catch a plane. That I hope and ambition would be that this would be the beginning of a foundational conversation that will push us to some tangible action solutions that can not only be engaged in by sort of the intelligentsia, the hoi polloi of academics, but those who are on the front lines, people's grandmothers and the like. And I know, I'm a Baptist. We have been served a bitter cup, but this too shall pass. They have quoted all the great people. They've quoted Du Bois and Frazier, and Rothstein. I love Richard Rothstein, especially his first book, Race, Class, and Education. Love that book. But one of the greatest philosophers, if you want to get it, is Kendrick Lamar. And if you have not listened to Pimp a Butterfly, I would encourage you to do it, because he says in that, he said, wouldn't you know, we've been down before when our pride was low, but we gonna be all right. We gonna be all right. Ashe.
So I just want to really encourage people to be a part of the collective. You can follow us
Twitter
at BLK EdLead. And so we encourage you to do that so that we can continue to update you on our activities, the type of research that we're doing, and disseminate that, and really provide an intellectual space that we can generate research that is going to help practitioners and policymakers. So again, if you would follow us at BLK EdLead, that's for Black Ed Lead. So that's the first thing, engaging the collective, because we're really excited about what that's going to do. It's important that we support and strengthen our Black institutions. I think over time we've seen them become weakened, and it's important that we really focus on strengthening our Black institutions, because they've been really critical to a lot of the civil rights advances and successes that we've been able to enjoy.
right.
The other thing is assessing your own local public school community. And everyone can do this, whether or not you're a parent, a grandparent, an educator, a teacher, or a leader. What are your current local public schools doing? And the charter schools and the private schools. What is going on there? Does it meet the needs of the community? Does it reflect the values? I see a lot of heads shaking no. But that's part of what we also want to do as part of the collective. What is currently going on and happening in our schools? And how can we ensure that we're able to collect that information from people all across the country? So assessing what our public schools are doing, and then thinking about what we want them and expect them to do. And then providing, again, the strategies and the tools to be able to make sure that our children have access to strong schools no matter where they live. And so that is really the goal and the vision. And the other thing that we had talked about, and I believe that Dr. Brown had made a commitment to hosting a series of convenings across the country with educators. Practitioners are really important to the work that we're doing. And so arranging a set of convenings, again, where we can bring the research, the policy, and practice communities together to share our knowledge, to help understand what's happening on the ground and the types of questions that we should be asking as researchers, and then also sharing the research that we're producing with practitioners so that we have, again, that communication and that civic infrastructure that's going to really allow us to move this work forward.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let you talk.
Oh, let the people talk.
Yeah, we have
Thank you so much to our panelists. And again, to Congressman Vesey for just letting us have this space. And we also want to thank former Congressman from Nevada, Stephen Horsford. He's challenged us to think about the kinds of questions that we would ask, the kind of framing that we would come up with, and how we're going to approach the collective, and to think more broadly and long-term about how this is all going to work. We appreciate that. So we're going to have a talk now. We want to take your questions. And do we just want them to come up to the mic, Philip, or did you get, okay. Woo.
Don't you open it up.
Right, yes. So we would just ask that you just ask a question. Because you know we all
And say where you're
will
from.
get into commentary, and I just want to say something. So please just ask one question so that we can get as many in as we can.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. Very informative, and really appreciate getting all your insights. My question is specifically for Dr. Douglas, but it's for everyone as well, or Douglas Horsford, I'm sorry. So I am from Indianapolis, Indiana. Went to public schools that were failing me. My mom put me in private schools, then went to Spelman College. After that, thank you, Spelman. After that, I actually did join Teach for America, and I spent 2 years teaching in public schools in Nashville, which is not my home, but then spent a year back in my public schools in Indianapolis. At that third year, I realized I could not do enough in the classroom to affect the change that I wanted for these kids, and so I went to law school. And I will say that having graduated from law school and working with kids in the juvenile justice system, I feel like I've had more of an impact on the education system and on our community in general as an attorney than I had as an educator.
Please.
Mind you, I respect educators. My father and grandmother are retired educators, but my question is, or like lifetime educators, my question is, I felt there was this pushback of like, people need to only be in the education system to kind of impact the education system. And I guess I'm asking, what should we be doing, right? Because it can't all happen in the classroom.
Yes, no, thank you for your question. I agree. I was not a teacher. I didn't actually come out of the classroom. And I think the role of community is very important, to Dr. Watson's point. And so part of the collective is really thinking about how we bring together nonprofit communities, the philanthropic community, the business community, lawyers, other agencies, and social service providers to support education. And so I don't think that education is limited to the school. I think we also need to talk more about informal education spaces. So a lot of learning happens at home, at church, at the barbershop, right?
Yeah,
At a lot of
at the
places, on the
barbershop.
sports field. I mean, I think about my boys who play basketball, the life lessons that they learn from their coaches and their teammates is very powerful as well. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I certainly think that the education of black children cannot be limited, and the conversation should not be limited to what's happening in the classroom or the school.
And let me help you. I'm about to fly back to Indianapolis, the Circle City Classic weekend, and Kentucky State is about to beat Central State tomorrow. But anyway, that you are a prime example of what Teach for America intended. There's a huge misnomer. I was dean of the College of Education at UNLV when I brought in Teach for America, much to the chagrin of the faculty, who did not forgive me, and they ran me out of town, but that's all right. I got a better job, pays more, got a new car, but anyway. So, but the problem is Teach for America was never, and hear this, Teach for America was never intended to solve the problems of schools or to solve the teacher workforce crisis. By their own definition, the purpose was to create informed citizens who would be caring and valuing the purpose and the politics that surround education. And so, so you're a great example of, so you give some service and time, almost like the Peace Corps used to do, and then the purpose was to be a part of an informed, educated citizenry around education. So now let me say, you got to remember, all of us work or have worked in schools of education, and so we get paid to train teachers in the traditional format. That's our bread and butter, and we got children to feed. So don't blame us for that. But let me say, in your defense to agree, that Teach for America was never intended to fix these problems, and you're a prime example of the product that they intended to create.
Could we, just before you go, Congressman Vesey has a question. I want to let him get
Oh,
in
yeah,
because he may
absolutely.
have to leave.
I wanted to ask the question. Let me apologize but I have to run in and out of different
no, please.
sections here. But I wanted to ask the panelists what they thought about and from an esteem point of view, the role of teaching in the African American community. I mean, growing up in Fort Worth, going to school in the 1970s in the Fort Worth Independent School District, in the 1970s and 80s. Most of the African American teachers, many of them lived in the community. I distinctly remember one of my teachers living catty corner from my grandmother, and during that time period also, it was it was considered a very esteemed profession to be a teacher. But now, when kids are graduating and going to college, particularly with the suburbanization, right? Like many of the people that, particularly I would say Gen X and millennials that have graduated from colleges, most of them, their whole deal is that they don't want to necessarily come back to the community. They want to be able to earn a big enough income so they can go to a very prestigious suburb and raise their kids there. And so with dealing with all of that, how do you think that that's a problem? The lack of I guess, I'm not going to say lack of honor, but as far as it being the pecking order of professions in the black community, teaching not being seen as being a mechanical engineer or, going to work at NASA or being an attorney or a doctor. If you could kind of share your thoughts with the audience on how that impacts teaching, I would love to hear that.
Answer that, or-
Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've done some consulting for some universities in their colleges of teacher education. And one of the major problems that they continue to ask us to address is why more people are not going into teaching. The things that we came up with after doing lots of interviews were their parents tell them not to, the way that the state in which they live perceives teachers, pays them, lack of tenure, large classrooms, no upward mobility. I worked in North Carolina for years. And so it's not, from our perspective, in terms of doing the work we were doing, not so much the person who might want to be the teacher, it's the people who are telling them, don't do that, they don't pay enough, you don't get any respect, these kids are bad, you can't afford to do that. And then if you live in a state like Indiana or like North Carolina, then your whole future is tied up in what the legislature says with respect to teachers, and it ain't good. And so that's, people might still see that as a prestigious or an honorable profession, but once they get it coming from both sides, parents, friends, people who've been teachers, kids are bad, that's where the problem is. I don't think it's so much that people don't want to go into teaching, but the teaching route has been diminished, marginalized, made so negative that they go, why bother? Yeah. And that's just from going to colleges of education and them asking us, tell us what's going on with these teacher ed programs that we just can't get people in.
Yep. Thank you for your comments. I wanted to invite you to dream out loud with us a little bit. And my fellow Tar Heel, Dr. Tillman, started out with the idea of a right to education. And there's a lawsuit currently in Detroit that's being filed about a right to education, and it defines a right to literacy as the right to be able to serve on a jury, to be educated well enough to be able to serve on a jury. And your Anansi story made me wonder, are there black sort of analogies that come out of our culture that might add on to this idea of what does citizenship look like to being able to serve on a jury? And the dreaming part is, what would black education for liberation and education as a practice for freedom look like on a day-to-day basis in a school?
Let me take that. I want to get to just make question. Let me do the last part. I'll let them do what it might look like in a school. Is again, I'm running back to those tripartite modes of mentoring, and it is to the extent, as my colleague has said, that teachers have a capacity and ability to touch children and touch their lives, transform their minds, and give them a hope and ambition to do it, whatever it is that they want to do, be, and become. And that does not happen in a lot of schools for a lot of children. They suffer, as Dr. Horsford said, all kinds of school violence. And we don't mean shooting and guns, but we talk about microaggressions in the classroom, being ignored, disrespected by teachers, devalued, and misunderstood. And so I think that is what Dreaming Out Loud for the day-to-day in the classroom, a place where children are touched and their lives are transformed into creative possibilities. And the reality is, you know, and I know it's the CBC, the reality is that the demographics of this country make very clear that that means that some of this touching has to be by non-black teachers. So there will not be enough black teachers to be in every classroom to touch every child. So we need other people's children touched by black teachers, and we need black children touched by other people. And they need to do that with an ethic of care, compassion, courage, and common sense.
And they need to read. And that's fabulous, Chris. You know, in response to that question, and I think this piggybacks off your point, they do need to read the Janice Hale Bensons, right? The late, who just passed away last week. They need to read Asa Hilliard. They need to read the Barbara Sizemore, the late Barbara Sizemores, the Edmund Gordons, who continue to tap the intellectual creativity and development of our children. So start there, right? Don't start with that curriculum that we might get, but start with the curriculum that does recognize the intellectual creativity and development of our own children. And so those 3 or 4 references will help as well.
So we're afraid we're not going to get through the line, so what we'd like for you to do, we'll take the next 3. Just say what your question is, we'll answer those, and then we'll take the next 3.
Yeah.
Mine is twofold. It's a question and a comment. As a nationally board certified teacher, I taught for 10 years before I got my administration degree to become a principal, and then joined Teach for America as a staff member to train teachers. My question is, how do we expand this space, this collective, to be inclusive of old programs? Because I was trained as a veteran teacher, did not have racial equity training, did not talk about what it means to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive, because all kids don't go to church. Some of them go to a mosque, like my son. And so how do we then expand the conversation to include those who are here for our kids, who do live in Eastern North Carolina, in Northampton, Halifax, rural, these parts of our rice fields and tobacco fields where we can't get teachers here, but we're then criticizing an organization instead of making space and reimagining what it can be. And to me, it feels like an illustration of like what we're facing now with this this administration where there's just the right fighting, and we're pointing the fingers instead of being a collective space where we can like have the conversation instead of trying to figure out where the blame is, because the blame is not with Teach for America. Poverty didn't start there, and it's not going to just be with black teachers. We need white people in this too, because we didn't create white supremacy. So then how do we create a larger space where we're just not pointing the fingers and just creating divisiveness?
Beautiful.
Because that's what your comment did. It was a blanketed statement.
Beautiful.
Which-
Next. We'll
I-
Okay, let's skip
We'll
the
get to
next
that.
question
We'll get to
first. Come on.
Yeah.
Erica Jones, a proud member of United Teachers Los Angeles, longtime teacher, first-time speaker.
Awesome.
In many large urban cities, language is being used to segregate brown and black communities specifically. How, as a black leader, do I tackle that without deepening the divide between brown and black students in our communities and their families?
Fabulous.
Awesome.
And one more, right?
Yeah, one more, thank you.
All right, I'm a little off-court, different.
Go ahead.
My research is mostly historically based on the perception of scientific racism and the perception of blacks being inferior
Yeah.
as compared to whites.
Yeah.
But it's relative when you think about black education and the terminology used, caste education. And my belief is that, and especially looking at the historical evolution of Du Bois and others who have taken part in trying to equalize society, but it's the idea of how we're perceived, how we're viewed, and how we're looked at. And I wanted to know if you had any opinions of that theory and how you think historically that theory might have hindered our ability to be able to come out of this idea of oppression, come out of this idea that we need something separate in terms of black education, and also come out of the idea that we should not be educated in certain fields because they don't feel as though that we're intelligent enough to do that, because inherently it is still believed, my argument is that we are perceived as inferior. Thank you.
Linda, can I do the first one? She do the
may.
second one, and then Hobson do the third one. Okay. Good. No, you hold that. Let me say, no, I'm dividing this up.
What do I know?
And so I get to
I wanna talk
to
about
sing.
scientific
Okay,
racism too,
okay.
but
Well,
go
you
ahead.
can do. You
Okay.
can comment on scientific racism. I'm the only one who decides tenure in here anyway. So I get. Oh, look at my son over there. So
time is it?
let me say this to the first question. I think she's absolutely right. I think what's very important, back to the TFA point, is we all come with our own lived experience, and that's why. And in fact, up until I guess about a week or two ago, Dr. Horsford and her company and colleagues were planning a research center, which they just expanded to a research collective.
Right.
Because there was an acknowledgement, and I think that highlights it, that there's limited capacity within the existing group and participants, and we need those other voices. And if you don't have that voice, you can't bring it. And it's just like I added, we have, E. Franklin Frazier said churches, and we want to expand that to spiritual houses, and not just spiritual houses in the traditional religious sense, but there was a lot of education done by the Black Panthers, and even though people don't want to acknowledge it, Move in Philadelphia did great education programs. And so all of that needs to be a part of the table, and I think that having that grounding and center in this collective is going to be critical to moving forward. So I thank you for those points. I think that was excellent.
So the second question,
Was on voice, on black and brown voices and providing leadership.
right, leadership. As you know, in New York City, actually, we have a minority-majority district, and our biggest demographic are Hispanic, you know, in a broad sense. So know that there's no exclusion, you know. So when I say black, I do mean black and brown, but as a black woman, a mother, you know, teacher, researcher, I come from this black perspective. But as people of color, I do think there needs to be an energy. We have to be in sync with one another. And so we have to make every attempt and effort to make language not a barrier but a bridge, and find what we have in common as opposed to how we are not alike. And we have to celebrate those things, and not just with some esoteric, you know, Puerto Rican month or something like these little, you know, Black History Month or something like that. But as a community, what do we have that we can build on to make our children better? So I do believe there's a place for that. You will most often see it in large urban cities like, you know, New York and California and Texas and such. But I do think when I say black, black and brown are in many ways interchangeable. Did I answer your question?
You know,
I hope so. And then and lastly for the TFA is not the devil. And I like white people. Some of my best friends are white, so know that when we're here, you know, I really don't want to come off as, no, like, good. Like, I don't want to come off as, you know, I don't see you or respect the good work you do to make all children, you know, change those life chances and make tomorrow better for all of us. Yes, Dr. Hobson?
I'm patient. I hope I didn't seem like I was rushing you, sis. I was busy thinking about this larger question that this sis was raising. I'm busy going through my
Mental Rolodex?
right, my bibliography.
Scientific racism.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things that we should put our heads around, and that's a really powerful question. I think it relates to some of the things we're talking about, is not getting twisted on the perception around and language and discourse around kind of non-intended consequences of choices that people make and we find ourselves in. So recognizing the systemic, the forceful, the apartheid that has told us that we can't, right, we're not speaking a language, our brains are smaller, right, all that goes to and replicates the kind of hegemony around culture and race that we face. And so we have to be diligent in terms of countering those, that narrative and that discourse. And so teaching is not for the weak. I don't really care, quite frankly, if you are TFA. You can get schooled as well. Yeah, and so I think part of it is not for us. I don't think we're up here assigning any blame up here. There are enough people out there assigning blame. And so I just think part of it is just making sure we're clear that those heroes that they put up, and they put up on those horses around town in DC or wherever they put them, those are not our heroes. We're not going to honor them. We're going to change them. You know, and I think an important platform that's come out recently, and I think we have to talk about the currency, because our boys and our girls are watching Sunday football. You know, we see the demonstrations, we see these conversations happening. It's not about cap. What about the brothers who are facing the CTE issues, right? Getting younger and younger. I mean, how about that? Can we stand for that? Can we sit for that? Right? And so I think we have to be clear about what game is being played here relative to the scientific racism, because it's everywhere. It's from my neurosurgeon kid to my Elliott School of George Washington kids who reads about people outside of the United States and perceived to be something other. And so those people outside the United States also read those newspapers. They look at us like, wow, I didn't know you also had the same kind of enslavement in your country that existed over here. And so we're clueless, quite frankly. Some of us are quite clueless about these things. And so we have to educate ourselves about these things and change that. It's a narrative, but it's a mindset too, right? And be diligent about that and challenge that and be forceful. Challenge with our feet, challenge with our vote, right? I mean, I'm not calling cap on this. And I think the story that he's brought out is an important one. You know, brothers are standing and sitting, and white boys even putting their hands on them nowadays. You know, you can see that, you know, and that's a great thing. But that's not where the conversations are only ending, right? And those brothers who are getting those checks need to be held accountable too. We can hold them accountable for those things as well. I just think that we have to reach harder and reach deeper than just these K-12 schools, and recognize that there are multiple places where this war around kind of scientific racism is extending in a lot of places in our society, and being able to step up to that.
So we will take the last 4 people, and someone will answer your question.
Hi, my name is Shelley Hughes. I'm from Los Angeles. I have the awesome charge of taking care of children from 3 months to 5 years before they get to the K. And the issue that I see is with the schools in my neighborhood, they're pretty terrible, but it's with the parents. So I want to know, with all the conversation going on here with educators and politicians, is there any research or outreach being done to reach the parents who have disengaged from their schools, from the community, from everything? Because I'm block captain, and the people don't even want to be involved in their community. They'd rather go 5 miles to the west to go to the west side to go shopping, to eat, even though there's things in the community. So with the schools, they're going 10 miles, 15 miles to take their children after they leave me. And I'm kind of cool because I get to see them during the day. I see them at church. I see them in the neighborhood until they get ready to leave college, because I've been doing it for 23 years. So my question is, how are you going to reach the parents and get them back on point?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Hewitt, and I'm an administrator, 27 years in education. I want to thank Dr. Hobson because after 27 years of continuing to have the same kind of conversation, I was like, really, I don't even want to go in here. And so just to a lot of things that you said, my first question is, are any of you doing any sustainability research on Black leaders? Because teaching is a yeoman's task. And if you do the tripart model, right, and you're a revolutionary leader, you peter out, right? And so part of the why you peter out is because there's this society and the white supremacy in which this school-to-prison pipeline, these traumatized communities, which make us have conversations like parents don't care. No, that's not it. So when you're doing that work over a 27-year period, and there's no prestige, and I just got to talk to a lot of business owners, and right, you get on the plane and everyone's in first class, but teachers and administrators in the back, no pensions, all types of conversations like that. So we need support, we need research. I'm on board with you guys.
Thank you.
To piggyback off of what, oh, yes.
Teach for America, 91. And so the question is, how do we create a Black Teach for America model in which we save 10 years in the community before you come?
Okay, all right.
Also, to piggyback off of what the sister was saying, what type of training can be provided because we are working in trauma centers in our urban communities? So if we look back at what you have recollected as historical background coming up as a young person, a lot of teachers are coming into the space, a lot of administrators are coming to a space, well, back in my day, we didn't do such and such and such and such, which is informing their leadership, their teaching practices. So when we talk about students being with a microaggression in the classroom, are these administrators and teachers prepared to deal with the trauma that the young people have suffered? So that's why they're acting out. I work with administrators and I work with teachers that, well, those kids are this, but they're not willing to go to the deeper issue of why these children are coming out like this. And until we begin to infuse that into our teachers' colleges and Montclair states to prepare folks to work with trauma-informed care, you know, how do we deal with that in our communities so we can effectively have revolution, pedagogy of freedom, all of that? Secondly, what are the further implications of charter schools? I'm from Jersey. I don't see charter schools in Milburn and Livingston. I don't see charter schools in certain affluent neighborhoods. So we talk about the CMO, the charter management So then do our communities then become de facto segregation? Because if I don't make it at the charter, they kick me back to the community school. Then if I don't make it at the community school, I go to the alternative school, and then they usually put people there. I mean, I work at an alternative school. I love it. I'm trying to do something different. But my question is, what are the further social economic implications of charter schools? Because then they also don't have to answer to local school boards. So in a community like Newark, where they're just getting back local control, half of the daggone district is now a charter. So half of the money doesn't have to be, so those are my questions. Thank you.
Great.
Hello, my name is Tanya England, and I'm a P12 educator with the New York State Education Department. I'm also a PhD student, and my paper is Family, School, and Faith-Based Community Organization around servant leadership and critical race theory. And so I want my paper to inform communities as well as educators. And so, a school counselor, I actually had to take a course that talked about this very same thing, family, school, and community engagement on a higher, because you're all on a higher ed level. What's being put in place to have a course for all educators? Because you talk about people needing to touch, not just Black teachers, but white teachers being able to touch our students. So what is being put in place on a higher ed level so that educators come out having received an education on how to deal with our community, how to deal with our parents, how to talk to our parents in a respectful manner. Not all educators believe that parents don't care about their children, but a lot do feel that the parents don't care because they don't show up for different reasons. Because you don't understand, some educators don't understand the family dynamic in our community. So my question is, what's being done on a higher ed level to educate, to have, I don't know, a full course, not just a chapter on our community?
So that's really the work that I've been trying to do. I started at Teachers College about a year ago, and we created and teach 2 courses that I think have attempted to do what you're describing, and I'm hoping this actually addresses some of the other questions as well. One is on the social context of education reform. So we're really digging again into the historical, political, social, and economic contexts that inform what happens in schools. And we also have a Leadership for Social Justice course where we really have students focus on their own identity. So you have to really unpack your own racial, cultural, ethnic identity. Why do you want to be an educator in the first place? In what ways can your own experiences help connect and inform the students that you're working with? So I really believe that we can do a better job in higher education in terms of acknowledging the context that people are currently working in and providing students with that information. And like I said, most of the students that I have worked with in my time at UNLV, George Mason, not most, but many, and currently at Teachers College are with Teach for America, do work with charter networks. And so it's not about the label or the type of training that you came through, but what you hope to accomplish as an educator and the ways we build that network of support to help educators to be successful. And a lot of that actually has to do with unpacking scientific racism. I wrote a piece called Badges of Inferiority, where we have tried to get rid of the badge of servitude and slavery, but in that chapter, I argue that we've replaced it with an achievement gap narrative. We've replaced it with different labels, right? And so it's just being aware of that. And so when you understand the landscape, you now think differently about the tools and the strategies that you use to overcome it, right? Because again, it's a political act. And so now that I know that this is my reality, and I know that schools are not the great equalizer, as Horace Mann told us they would be, now that changes my whole approach, right? And to engage and prepare students for our current reality.
And in terms of parent involvement, if you would shoot me an email, I wrote this article in 2015. It's called Reframing Parent Involvement. What can school leaders do differently? And I use the tenets of critical race theory to analyze their actions and perceptions of school leaders and how they view parent involvement. And many of them use this hegemonic view, meaning they're from traditional norms that don't align to our reality. And I know as a parent, kind of ironic, I can count on both hands how many times I've gone to school for my own child, but I just assume that she said she had a good day, okay, so we went on with our day. But parent involvement, is different for us than it is for them, and even how we define it. Is it just signing a report card or going to school, or is it me making sure we have, ink in the printer so she can get her work, to the teacher in a timely manner? So it's ways in how we perceive it, and then more importantly, as school leaders, is what we ask of parents. Is it really feasible? Are we simply setting them up for failure, and are we holding them accountable to standards that we ourselves, we couldn't be able to do? So that's important, how we frame and define the term parent involvement and using norms that celebrate us.
Can I comment on the parent? So I've done a lot of work on parental involvement, and my assumption about it is always parents want to be involved engaged in their children's education, and they want the best for their children. That's my assumption, whether I'm the consultant or whether I'm the professor in the classroom. My assumption is, and as a high school teacher, that's the assumption that I had. But it's what we fail to do with a lot of our black parents, particularly low-income black parents, is to understand that they sometimes come to school with a lot of baggage, and they don't know how to negotiate school sites. And the people in the school sites don't help them to negotiate them. So I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but I think we just need to think that a lot of them are very young. A lot of them come to the school site with a lot of problems. And as teachers and school site leaders, we have to be more willing be more proactive about helping them to negotiate in the best way that they can for their students. Because we want to still put them in Joyce Epstein's model as helpers and not advocates for their children. So we want to dismiss them because, A, of the color of their skin, and then their class. And so I still want to say we need to assume that they want the best for their children, but it's, our responsibility to help them to learn how to negotiate the school site as best they can for their children, given the context that they live in, which is probably different from ours, and so sometimes we don't understand that. Yeah.
But I wanted to just throw out some words for all of these educators. Please. People who spent time. I'm from Durham, North Carolina.
Oh, Lord, I just left there.
I'm not going to say anything about me, but I want us to just list some words. White privilege,
All right.
post-racial era, more help, POME, poor me. The big P deals with what? People. The only way we're going to solve this problem, what controls everything in our life that starts with a P?
Politics.
Politics. The worst voting people in North Carolina who are educated are teachers. And tell them Dr. Allison said it. And I know what I'm talking about. We cannot solve anything in the classroom when you go to North Carolina Central and they do not know there are 5 different areas where you can call up the Board of Election. You know what your Senate district is, you know what your House district is, you know what your judicial district is. Walk on any classroom, black, white, or polka dot, and ask them, how can I find out who my school board member is? If we don't understand that money and politics controls all of money, that makes a difference. And I want to know, have you all said anything about politics today? P-O-Me. You got to organize and know what your precinct is or your district. And you got to organize. The most equalizing thing in the United States is what? The right to vote. My vote, or the woman's vote who doesn't have a dime, is just as equal as that man who is a billionaire. And we haven't told them this. We haven't taught them. If we don't understand what the role has to be, we got 10 HBCUs in the state of North Carolina. They'll come out and jam and jazz and so forth. 57 precincts. The lowest voting precinct is 55-49. I was 30 years almost ago, I fought to get that precinct on that campus. The primary has to be the first vote. We got black folk and other folk. I don't need to do it primary. I'm going to wait and get it in the general election. You got to vote in the primary before you get to the general election. Thank you for letting me.
Yes.
If you all need to talk about how we going to organize all of those poor communities, tell them. Find out who the person is. March in front of their doors. Get what I'm saying? Yes. Everybody in here. White privilege has changed on the football field. Who's sitting on the bench at Duke when we, in fact, started out? That's the only place you got to, in fact, show that you're better or you're just as good. Talking is not going to do it. Thank you.
Amen.
We want to thank you for coming to this session. Please give our panelists a hand. Thank you so much.